7 years. That's how long it takes to really know someone, they say. Turns out it's also exactly how long someone can plan to destroy you from the inside out. When I lost $56,000 to my own wife, I didn't just lose money. I lost faith in my ability to read people. And in a place like the Philippines, where trust is all you have, that's worse than being broke. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our longtime viewers, and he wanted his experience heard. I thought I had it all figured out when I moved to Cebu 7 years ago. At 59, after 35 years working oil rigs in Texas and a divorce that took half my savings, I was ready for something different. The Philippines seemed like paradise compared to the endless drilling schedules and bitter winters back home. Elena changed everything the moment I met her at a coffee shop in Ayala Center. She was 28, beautiful in that effortless way Filipino women have, working as a nurse at a private hospital downtown. "You look lost," she said with a smile that made my chest tight. I was lost, completely lost, and she became my compass. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you here," I told her on our third date, watching her laugh at my terrible jokes about Texas barbecue. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Maybe you weren't meant to find me back in America," she said. "Maybe you were meant to find me here." Her English was perfect, her touch gentle, and for the first time since my divorce, I felt like I could breathe again. Within 6 months, we were living together in a beautiful house I rented in a gated community. Elena quit her job to take care of me full-time. "Let me make your life easier," she whispered one morning, bringing me coffee in bed. "You've worked so hard for so long." The routine we built felt like something out of a movie. Elena would wake up early to prepare my breakfast, always asking what I wanted for dinner, making sure my clothes were clean, managing our household expenses while I played golf with other expats or read books by the pool. The neighbors respected us as a couple. Other Western men envied what I had: a devoted wife, a comfortable home, the respect of the community. "You got lucky, Jake," my buddy Frank would say during our weekly poker games. "Elena's a keeper." I felt proud walking with her through the mall, introducing her as my wife after we married in a simple ceremony at the city hall. She wore a white dress that cost $50 and looked more beautiful than any woman in an expensive gown. But there were moments that nagged at me, little things I told myself weren't important. Elena would get phone calls in Tagalog and step outside to answer them, always returning with explanations about family drama or work gossip. She managed our joint account, paying bills and household expenses, always showing me receipts when I asked. Sometimes the numbers didn't quite add up. Groceries seemed expensive, utility bills higher than expected. But I figured the cost of living was different here, and Elena understood the local markets better than I did. "Don't worry about money, Mahal," she'd say, using the Tagalog word for love that made me feel special. "I take care of everything for us." The first real red flag came on a Tuesday morning in our 3rd year of marriage. I was reading the newspaper when Elena sat down across from me, her eyes red from crying. "Jake, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice breaking. "My cousin Miguel is in the hospital. He had a motorcycle accident yesterday, and they need money for surgery, $3,000. She showed me photos on her phone. A young man in a hospital bed, bandages covering his head, medical equipment surrounding him. The desperation in her voice was real, raw, the kind of pain you can't fake. "If we don't help him, he might die," she whispered. I didn't hesitate. I drove to the bank that afternoon and withdrew the money, watching Elena's face light up with relief and gratitude. Thank you, Mahal," she said, kissing me with a passion that made me feel like a hero. "You saved his life. My family will never forget this." That night she cooked my favorite meal and we made love with an intensity we hadn't shared in months. I felt needed, important, like the man I used to be when I was solving problems on the oil rigs. "I want to visit Miguel in the hospital," I mentioned casually the next week. Elena's expression shifted slightly, just for a second. "He's been transferred to Manila for specialized treatment," she explained quickly. "The doctors here couldn't handle his injuries." A week later, I noticed Elena wearing new earrings, delicate gold pieces that caught the light beautifully. "Where did you get those?" I asked, admiring how they framed her face. "My sister Rosa gave them to me," she said, without missing a beat. She felt bad about asking for help with Miguel and wanted to thank me. The coincidence bothered me more than it should have. Why would her sister give her expensive jewelry when the family was dealing with medical bills? But Elena's explanation sounded reasonable, and questioning her felt like doubting her love. I pushed the feeling down, telling myself I was being paranoid. The emergencies started coming more frequently after that. Elena's nephew needed school fees, $1,200 for a private academy that would give him better opportunities. Her mother required surgery for gallstones, $2,500 that insurance wouldn't cover. A family friend offered Elena's brother a partnership in a small business, but they needed $4,000 as a down payment by the end of the week. Each time, Elena's distress was genuine, her gratitude overwhelming. She would show me documents, photos, text messages from family members explaining the situations. I started keeping a small notebook, writing down the amounts and dates, telling myself I was just being practical about our expenses. "You're so good to my family," Elena would say, holding me close after each crisis. "They love you like their own son now." The amounts were adding up, over $15,000 in 6 months, but Elena always had explanations. She showed me receipts from money transfers, photos of grateful relatives, updates on Miguel's recovery progress. Our intimate life remained passionate. She still cooked my favorite meals, still laughed at my stories about life in Texas. When doubt crept into my mind, I reminded myself that this was what marriage meant, supporting each other's families. Being there during emergencies, Elena had given up her career to take care of me. The least I could do was help her family when they needed it. I decided to surprise Elena by visiting her mother in her hometown of Bohol. I told her I was going to Manila on business, and instead took a flight to Tagbilaran, renting a motorbike to find the small village where Elena grew up. Her mother lived in a modest concrete house with a corrugated roof, surrounded by coconut trees and vegetable gardens. She welcomed me warmly, offering me coffee and homemade kakanin, treating me like honored guest. Through broken English and hand gestures, I asked about her recent surgery. "Surgery?" she repeated, looking genuinely confused. "I have surgery. I feel good, strong like Carabao," she laughed, flexing her arm to show her strength. The house showed no signs of recent medical bills or recovery. Elena's mother seemed perfectly healthy, walking around the property showing me her chickens and vegetable garden with the energy of someone half her age. I asked about Miguel's accident, and she looked even more puzzled. "Miguel, he working in Kuwait, sending money home, no accident." She showed me recent photos on an old smartphone, Miguel in construction gear, smiling beside a half-built building in the desert. That night, I called Elena from my hotel room, carefully probing about her mother's health. "How is your mama feeling after the surgery?" I asked casually. "She's recovering well," Elena replied smoothly. "But you know how she is, embarrassed. About her illness, doesn't like to talk about it. She pretends she's stronger than she is." Her voice carried the right mix of concern and affection, so convincing that I almost believed her again. Almost. "Maybe I should visit her next month," I suggested. "Oh no, Mahal, she wouldn't want you to see her like this. She's very proud, wants to be healthy and beautiful when she sees you again." Elena's explanations were always perfect, always reasonable, always delivered with just enough emotion to make me feel guilty for questioning her. I started paying closer attention to Elena's behavior when I returned to Cebu. I noticed she received notifications on her phone throughout the day, always quickly swiping them away before I could see the content. When I asked about the messages, she would explain they were from former colleagues at the hospital or neighbors sharing gossip. She had cash that she claimed came from selling old jewelry or receiving payments for helping other families navigate hospital bureaucracy. But I remembered her wearing some of those pieces recently, and the amounts seemed too large for occasional consulting work. I began checking our bank statements more carefully and discovered money had been moving in patterns I didn't recognize. Elena had power of attorney for certain transactions, something we had set up years earlier when I was sick with dengue fever and couldn't handle banking myself. She had been making transfers I wasn't aware of, always for amounts under $1,000, to avoid triggering automatic alerts that would notify me by email. When I confronted her gently about the unfamiliar transactions, she showed me receipts and explanations for everything: payments to contractors working on her mother's house, medical bills for various relatives, school fees for nieces and nephews. Her documentation was always thorough, always believable. "Mahal, why are you checking our accounts so carefully?" she asked one evening, her voice carrying hurt rather than anger. "Don't you trust me to take care of our money?" The way she looked at me, wounded, disappointed, made me feel like the worst kind of husband. "I trust you completely," I said quickly, pulling her close. "I just want to understand our expenses better, maybe help you manage everything." She softened in my arms. "You work so hard your whole life. Now you should relax. Let me worry about money. Let me take care of you." Her words were exactly what I wanted to hear, and I let myself believe them because the alternative was too devastating to consider. But the doubt had planted itself too deeply. I hired a local investigator, feeling like I was betraying my own marriage. Roberto Montero had been recommended by another expat who suspected his girlfriend of cheating. "I need to know if my wife is being honest about her family's financial emergencies," I told him, handing over Elena's information. "I feel terrible even asking, but something doesn't feel right." Roberto was professional and discreet. "Sometimes the truth hurts," he said gently, "but living in uncertainty hurts more." Within a week, Roberto provided evidence that changed everything. Elena had been sending money regularly to a man named Carlos Delgado in Manila, not family emergency funds, but payments toward a condominium they were purchasing together. There were photos of them together at restaurants, shopping malls, even vacation destinations I recognized from Elena's supposed visits to her sick relatives. Bank records showed a business partnership between Elena and Carlos dating back 6 years, predating our marriage. The investigator revealed that Elena had been working with Carlos to systematically drain my accounts over several years, using fabricated family emergencies as cover for their real estate investments and business ventures. "Your wife is married to this man," Roberto explained, showing me official documents. "They married 4 years before she met you and never divorced. The family emergencies are fictional, the medical bills are forged, the business opportunities are non-existent. They've been running this operation on several foreign men simultaneously." I sat in Roberto's office staring at photos of my wife embracing another man, kissing him in ways that looked natural and comfortable, feeling like my entire reality was collapsing around me. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How long have they been planning this?" Roberto looked at me with genuine sympathy. "From the beginning, sir. From the very first day she met you." I drove home that evening in a daze, my mind unable to process what I had learned. Elena was preparing my favorite dinner, grilled fish with rice and vegetables, the meal she had made for me on our first date 7 years ago. The smell that usually made me feel loved and cared for now made me nauseous. For a moment, I considered pretending I knew nothing, living in the lie because it was easier than facing the truth. I could continue being the happy retiree with the devoted wife, ignore the evidence, pretend the last 7 years meant something real. Instead, I placed the photos on the table next to my plate. Eleanor looked at them without touching them, her expression cycling through surprise, fear, calculation, and finally settling into a cold mask I had never seen before. She didn't cry, didn't deny anything, didn't try to explain the images away. "So you know," she said simply, her voice completely different from the soft, loving tone I was used to hearing. "Yes," I replied, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "I know everything." "Carlos is my real husband," she said, sitting across from me with a calmness that was more disturbing than anger would have been. "We married when I was 24 before I met you. We never divorced." She spoke matter-of-factly as if discussing the weather. "I did care for you, Jake, more than I expected to, but I needed security for my future, and you needed someone to love. It worked for both of us." Her honesty was more devastating than any lie could have been. "For 7 years?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "For 7 years." Elena began explaining the entire operation with a disturbing calm that made me realize this conversation was something she had prepared for. Carlos and I identified you through your dating profile before we ever met, she said, her voice clinical and detached. Your financial information, your loneliness after your divorce, your age, your desire for a young wife, everything made you perfect for our plan. She pulled out a notebook I had never seen before, filled with handwritten observations about my habits, preferences, emotional triggers, and financial patterns. The 7-year timeline wasn't accidental. It was strategic, long enough to establish complete trust and legal access to your money, but not so long that you would become suspicious of the pattern. She showed me pages of notes about my psychological vulnerabilities, how I responded to gratitude, how guilt motivated me to be generous, how my need to feel needed made me susceptible to family emergency stories. You always gave more money. When I cried, she noted, reading from her observations. But not too much crying or you would become suspicious. The right amount of desperation, followed by gratitude and physical affection, produced the best results. Reading my own emotional profile in her handwriting, seeing myself reduced to a psychological case study was the most humiliating moment of my life. Did any of it mean anything to you, I asked. Some of it, she replied. I grew fond of you. You were kind to me, kinder than I expected. But fondness isn't love, and kindness isn't enough to change what I needed to do. We spent the next hour going through our accounts together, and the financial damage was worse than I had imagined. The $56,000 I thought I had lost was actually closer to $78,000 when I accounted for gifts, property improvements, and business investments that had never existed. Elena had been systematically taking money for 7 years, starting with small amounts and gradually increasing them so I wouldn't notice the pattern. She had also taken jewelry, electronics, and valuable items from our home, replacing them with convincing fakes she had purchased online. The house we live in is actually owned by Carlos, she explained, showing me property documents I had never seen before. You put the down payment in my name for tax reasons, remember? That money went directly into the condo purchase in Manila. I remembered the conversation differently. Elena had suggested putting the property in her name to avoid complications with foreign ownership laws, and I had trusted her to handle the legal details. Now I realized I had no legal claim to the home I thought was ours. The furniture, the appliances, even the car. Everything is in our names, not yours, she continued. Legally, you own almost nothing here. The next morning, I consulted with attorney Maria Santos, a lawyer who specialized in cases involving foreign nationals and Filipino spouses. How your situation is unfortunately common, she explained after reviewing my documents. The power of attorney you gave Elena was legitimate, and many of the financial transactions can be justified as household expenses or family support. Exactly what a loving husband might provide. The fact that Elena and Carlos were already married complicates things legally, but proving fraud will be extremely difficult without evidence of explicit deception in writing. Attorney Santos explained that Philippine law strongly favors family, financial obligations, and my voluntary gifts to Elena's relatives, even if those relatives didn't exist, would be nearly impossible to recover. The courts will see these as normal spousal support, especially since you were married under Philippine law and living here as residents, she said. Your wife was careful to structure everything in ways that appear completely legal. Recovery of your assets would require proving that Elena deliberately deceived you about specific investments or purchases, not just about her motivations. I was facing the possibility that most of my money was simply gone, lost to a perfectly legal long-term manipulation that I had participated in willingly. Elena didn't move out immediately after our confrontation. For 2 surreal weeks, we continued living in the same house while I processed what had happened to my life. She seemed almost relieved that the deception was over, occasionally showing glimpses of the affection I remembered, bringing me coffee in the morning, asking about my day, even laughing at my jokes in moments when she seemed to forget our new reality. I know you hate me now, she said one evening, as we sat on the terrace where we used to plan our future together. But I want you to know that I never hated you. You made this easier than it could have been. Easier? I asked, not sure I wanted to understand what she meant. You were kind, she replied. Some of the other men Carlos and I worked with were cruel, demanding, suspicious from the beginning. You trusted me, treated me well, made me feel like a real wife sometimes. It would have been harder if you had been different. Her matter-of-fact attitude about destroying my life was more difficult to accept than anger would have been. I found myself questioning every memory we had shared. Our wedding day, quiet mornings over coffee, evenings watching movies together, intimate moments that had felt like genuine love. Was any of it real for you? I asked. Some of it, she said. More than I expected. Elena finally left on a Tuesday morning while I was at the market buying groceries for one. She took only her personal belongings and left a handwritten letter on the kitchen table where we had shared thousands of meals together. Jake, it began. Carlos and I are moving to Manila to start our legitimate life together. The condo is finished, and we have enough money to open the restaurant we always dreamed of. I want to thank you for the years we had together. While my ultimate reasons for being with you were financial, I did develop genuine care for you over time. You are a good man who deserves better than what I gave you. I hope you find happiness with someone who can love you without conditions. The house felt enormous and empty without her presence. Every room held memories that now felt contaminated. The kitchen where she had cooked for me, the bedroom where we had been intimate, the living room where we had watched Filipino soap operas together, while she taught me Tagalog phrases I would never use again. I realized how completely my life had revolved around our shared routine, our conversations about the future, our plans for growing old together in this country that had seemed like paradise. Without Elena, I was just another aging American man living alone in a foreign country, surrounded by possessions that weren't really mine. I was forced to sell the house to cover debts and legal fees, moving into a small apartment in a less desirable part of Cebu City. The expat community I had been part of felt different now. Some people had known about Elena and Carlos, but hadn't warned me. Others clearly suspected I had been naive, and a few seemed to blame me for not being more careful with my money. You should have seen it coming, Frank said during what would be our last poker game together. Filipino women don't marry old American men for love. His words stung because part of me agreed with them. Part of me felt like a fool for believing in a fairy tale at my age. I started attending a support group for scam victims that met weekly at a community center near my apartment. The stories were depressingly similar. Lonely Western men who had been systematically drained by partners who had never loved them. The money isn't the worst part, said Robert, a retired teacher from Australia, who had lost $40,000 to a woman who had disappeared after 3 years. It's realizing that your judgment about people, especially people you love, can't be trusted anymore. I discovered I wasn't alone in my experience, but knowing that others had suffered similarly didn't diminish my own pain or restore my confidence in my ability to read people's true intentions. Rebuilding my finances at 59 felt overwhelming. My retirement account had been depleted, my savings were gone, and I was living on social security payments that barely covered rent and basic expenses in the Philippines. I considered returning to Texas, but the thought of explaining my situation to family and friends back home felt humiliating. At least here, I could disappear into anonymity among other expats who had their own reasons for leaving America behind. I started doing small consulting jobs for oil companies operating in the region, using my decades of experience to earn enough money to survive while I figured out what the rest of my life would look like. The worst part wasn't the financial damage. It was the psychological impact of learning that 7 years of my life had been built on a complete lie. Every happy memory was contaminated by the knowledge that Eleanor had been performing for me, that every kiss, every laugh, every moment of apparent intimacy had been calculated to maintain her access to my resources. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Amanda Cruz, a Filipino-American psychologist who specialized in helping expats deal with cultural and relationship trauma. You're grieving not just the loss of your wife, she explained, but the loss of your identity as someone who could recognize authentic love. 6 months after Elena left, she contacted me through Facebook Messenger, asking for help with Carlos's legal troubles. He was arrested for fraud in another case, she wrote. We need money for a lawyer. I know you're angry with me, but please help us. for the years we had together. I stared at the message for a long time, amazed that she still saw me as a resource rather than a person she had wronged. Her request made me realize that in her mind, I had never been a husband or partner. I had been a solution to a financial problem. And now that she had a new financial problem, it seemed natural to turn to the same solution. I didn't respond to Elena's message. I blocked her on social media, deleted her phone number, and threw away the few photos of us that I had kept. Dr. Cruz called it reclaiming my narrative, refusing to continue playing the role Elena had written for me in her script. "You have to decide who Jake Morrison is going to be going forward," she said during one of our sessions. "Not Jake the oil worker, not Jake the husband, not Jake the victim, just Jake, starting over at 59, with whatever wisdom this experience has given you. I've learned that 7 years of marriage can be built entirely on calculation, that love can be performed so convincingly that even the person being deceived becomes complicit in writing the script. Eleanor was an actress, and I was her most devoted audience member, applauding a performance that was destroying me from the inside out. I'm not the same man who believed in second chances and fairy tale endings. I'm more careful now, more guarded, but also somehow more realistic about what relationships can and should be. The $56,000 taught me the most expensive lesson of my life. When someone shows you who they are through their actions over time, believe them the first time, not the 7th year. I stay in the Philippines because going back to America feels like admitting defeat. And despite everything that happened, I still find beauty in this country that Eleanor couldn't steal from me. The sun sets over the ocean, the warmth of genuine Filipino friendships I've developed, the sense that I can reinvent myself here in ways that wouldn't be possible back home. Sometimes I wonder if Elena thinks about me, if she ever feels guilt about the 7 years she took from my life. But mostly, I try not to think about her at all. The man who loved Elena Santos doesn't exist anymore. The man who trusted completely, who believed that love could conquer cultural differences and age gaps, who thought his kindness and generosity could earn him genuine affection. That man died in the investigator's office looking at photos of his wife with another man. What emerged from his ashes is harder, wiser, and lonelier, but also more honest about the world and his place in it. I'm learning to be alone without being lonely, to find meaning in small things like morning coffee, conversations with neighbors, the satisfaction of solving problems for oil companies that still value my expertise. It's not the retirement I planned, not the love story I thought I was living, but it's real in a way that my marriage never was. And after 7 years of living, someone else's fiction reality, even this diminished, careful version of it, feels like a gift.